Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Tattoos and Telehealth. I'm Kelly White with Kari Health. And of course, I'm joined by my fabulous colleague, Miss Nicole Baldwin. Excuse me. This podcast does not constitute a patient-provider relationship. So last week we had an incredible opportunity to visit with a professional about burnout, but there's some things that kind of come along with that we wanted to highlight today. And Nicole, this is something that's very kind of near and dear to you. You want to take off and chat about that?
Yeah. So something that as we are, Kelly and I both come from trauma ICU, ER. We come from that world. And probably one of the most difficult things is we've seen more death than anyone should ever have to see, right? The police officers, the firemen, the nurses, the doctors. Yeah, we see more of that than anyone can probably even imagine. And especially working through COVID, but even before that, we see people at their worst, right? When you're at your worst, you're in the ER, right? Or you're
Physically and mentally at your worst.
both of those for sure. And so as a healthcare provider, we become very, I don't know if I want to say I've become, and this is like just in life in general, not necessarily just at the hospital, but we become very like where we keep our emotions. We're very good at stop, moving on, stop what we're doing, moving on. And that comes from being in one room where we're coding a pediatric patient or not, it doesn't matter, an adult. And then the next room over, 10 minutes later, it's a patient who we're, trying to give a warm blanket to and a turkey sandwich. But you don't carry, right? You don't carry that same emotion in one room that you carried in the next. And so let's say we are trying to save a patient, and then our next patient is, let's say, a 10-year-old girl with an asthma attack who's not necessarily in life-threatening danger, but we don't bring that same, we come in with a positive attitude, with a gentle spirit, at the same time, understanding that we just came from a situation where we were trying to save a life and things were very, very grim, dire. Maybe they died, maybe they didn't. Regardless, we go from such dire adrenaline situations that literally life and death to, in the snap of a finger, we're in front of a patient where our smile and the way that we interact with them is super important. It's super important to the way that they see this visit. Nobody wants to go to the ER and have a grouchy provider, nurse, doctor, whatever. And so we try to make them to be as warm as possible so that they're not scared, right? So they say like the ER nurses, we become jaded, right? We become jaded and nothing really bothers us. And it's not true, but it is true. It's like we are trained to feel, we're in a situation, we feel one way, and in the snap of a finger, we're expected to, and not expected to, but we should. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. We go to another room where we have to be like, because that's what's in the best interest of our patients. And so we always want to take care of patients in the best way that's best for them. And in one room, it may be one thing. And then in the next room, it's a completely different situation. And so I think as providers, we get good at nothing really affecting us too much from an emotional standpoint. And I think that we struggle with that, and it carries into our home lives and it carries into our personal life as well. What are your thoughts on that? Am I rambling here? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head, but I think that what's important for not only other providers to hear us talk about, but for the public in general to hear us say is that we do care. We do have feelings and we do take that home. And while we are expected to turn that off and go to the next room and turn that off and go to the next room and turn that off and go to the next room, that does weigh on us. And over time, that contributes to, like we talked about last week with Melissa, contributes to burnout. And I think that it just goes back to showing how critical it is for providers to be able to recognize that in themselves so they can reach out for help, so they can reach out to someone to be able to share those emotions with. Because as providers, I don't know about you, Nicole, but there were so many nights when, and I say nights because by the end of your shift, it is night, to come home and leave it at the door. You pull in the garage and you sit in your car for an extra 2 or 3 minutes because you're trying to decompress and you have to leave it at the door before you walk into your family for whatever happened. And it is a lot and it is significant. And I think that we as providers take for granted that over the years of doing this, we learn to cope with what's happening from one room to the next to the next, like whether that's in the ER, whether that's in the ICU, or, when I finished up my in-hospital career in neurosurgery, we may have a gunshot victim in OR1 and then turn right around and have just your day-to-day bread and butter spinal fusion coming up next, and after you walked out of this very traumatic, very, very bloody, very terrible, emotional, everybody's on a high from this gunshot to the head. Now you have to regroup, step back, and then go to pre-op and see the family and smile and talk about the spinal fusion and do all the things. And you're just like, you're still running, your adrenaline is still going, you're still literally covered in the blood of the patient you were just with. And it makes it very hard.
I think we don't have time to decompress and we don't have time to deal with things. And so it's just like carrying this heavy backpack. A stone goes in the back. My pastor was talking about one time about how we carry things that we weren't meant to carry. And these are little things that, because we don't have time to deal with, maybe we feel like everybody tried to die on us today, right? But when
Yeah.
we go home, our kids still want, they're super happy to see us, what's for dinner, you know, so you just put it away, you just put it in the back, you just put it in your backpack, and you just truck on. And over years and years and years, it's all just, you just never have the time to decompress and deal
Yeah.
because you're running, because it's just the nature of the beast. And so it's not that we are saying that it's bad or it's good or indifferent. It just is, like, it just is. And I think awareness for providers to say it's okay to feel overwhelmed, it's okay to feel just like you've kind of walled off. And I think that that's where therapy, as we met with Melissa last week, therapy for providers is super important, because we put things away every day that we work. We are putting things, maybe one patient cussed you out from up one side and down the other because maybe they weren't, you know, have liver issues and they're not in their right mind, or maybe they are in their right mind, they're just mean. But then you go to the next patient and it's a sweet little old lady you just want to take home with you, right? So it's so polar opposites, the dealings that we deal with, and we have no time to compress. And so sometimes that comes out at home in frustration, it comes out with, over time. But eventually we do get jaded, and it's just our coping, it's the way that we cope, going from one thing to the next without any explanation, without anything. You're just like a robot, right? You're just going. But robots don't have those emotions. So, it's definitely difficult. We become emotionless almost. We can't be crying if we're trying to, we can't be crying. We can't be falling apart, right? So how do nurses will joke about things and people say that's morbid, but, and doctors too, will joke about things that normal people wouldn't joke about, or will, make a funny over something that really to normal people isn't funny. But when you're in this world, it's just how we cope. It's just how we cope. And so I think that therapy is a really good thing. Um,
I think my mom used to get incredibly mad at me whenever I first came out of school and became an ICU nurse. And those first couple of years of learning kind of how to cope with that and how to deal with the emotions that came along with it, I learned how from those older nurses, and they were amazing, they were incredible, they took me under their wing and taught me these things. But as you said, you learn to joke and you learn to use that as your tool to get through day to day. But things would fascinate me, like, the major AAA that ruptured when it came through you know what I mean? Like the little things, you're just like, wow, that is so cool. I got to see this today and I got to see that today. And my mom would get furious with me because she'd be like, that person was suffering or that person's family was so upset. And how can you be excited about that? And how can you be, that's terrible. I'm like, well, yeah,
That's trauma
it
surgery.
kind of
I love
is.
it. I love it.
Yeah, but for me, it was exciting because I was a new nurse and I was learning and it was cool. And even all the way up until I left the hospital setting in neurosurgery, I know how tragic a gunshot wound to the head is. But do you know how cool it is to do it in the
Very
OR, like
cool.
getting to
It's
pick through the
very
brain
cool.
and pick all the little parts of the bullet out? And that sounds terrible.
It does sound terrible when they wheel the bedside intracranial drill for to drill burr holes at the bedside. When I see that car come out,
So
I am
fun.
like all sorts of excited. I'm
Yes.
like, let's do it. We're going to drill in the head, but we separate it from the person.
Yeah,
So it's not that we lack compassion because we don't even tie it to a person. It's a head, it's a brain. It's not, we disassociate it from emotion, and so to us it's a person. So example, it has ruined, being in medicine has ruined haunted houses for me, right? Because now when I go and I see guts and it's like in like a haunted house, I'm like, oh, that's a bad liver. Oh, like it's not even scary because but that's, we don't look at it as a scary thing. We look at it as it's an organ. It's a thing. It's a thing. It's not a human. It's a thing. And so we are very good at disassociating that because you, like you're saying, you see it as a gunshot wound to this head, not Bobby who is a college student and was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. We don't know any of that. We don't know any of that, and we'd probably rather not.
I
We
wonder.
just know it as we're trying to save this head, this person, but we don't have any emotional attachments to
Yeah,
this person. I will tell you, when my dad went into surgery for his total replacements, I did not want to be in the OR for that because I didn't think that I would be able to handle it. Just the way that we move things around, the way that we hammer, and the way that we saw, because I have an emotional connection. And so we've learned to not have emotional connections because that's how we deal with things.
yeah,
So it's very tough to struggle that at home and,
sure,
in the hospital.
sure. I think that the whole point of it is, kind of what Nicole and I are trying to get at is one, it's okay in that moment to disassociate your feelings professionally and personally,
You
because
have
that's
to.
what we have to do to survive in our field. And then two, it's okay to step back and then feel those emotions if that is what you need to do to get through the day. Those emotions wouldn't exist if it wasn't okay to feel them. So it's okay to feel those emotions after the fact. The struggle becomes where and how do we blend the disassociation and the feelings of the emotions, and how do we cope with knowing that those two have to separate the moment we walk through the doors of the clinic, the ER, the hospital, or whatever it is, and the moment that we pull in our carport or driveway or garage and come home to our families. And then also, I think what's the most important thing is having grace, number one, for ourselves, knowing that's a real emotion and it's okay. And then number two, for our families to recognize that you got to have a little bit of grace for us sometimes at the end of the day when we're not super emotional about something. You're like, why aren't you more upset about this? Well, I've kind of learned to turn that off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get it. My ex-husband would say, "Oh, I got this. Oh, just like this." I'm like, seriously, unless your head is down, your feet are up, and you have 85 drips and 6 tubes, you're fine. You're fine. Like, you're fine. You just don't care.
Exactly.
Not really about your little paper cut. No, I don't. I don't. And I'm not trying to be rotten. I just don't. Like, suck it up. Like, you know what I mean? And so we become, you know, we joke about it today because we're still friends, but we have to leave our emotions at the door, because if I felt an emotion to that person or that patient, I don't know that I would be able to revert back to my training, because emotions take over, right? Like, emotions take over when they come, they're strong, whether it's an anxiety attack, whether it's being tearful, whether it's being angry. It's hard to control emotions. And how can I control emotions and do what I'm trained to do? So the emotions have to stay out. You have to learn to put them out so that you can do your job. Because if there's an emotional attachment, it's going to skew your it's going to skew the way that you're doing things, right? Like I would do things, differently because I have an emotional attachment, and so we learn to not have it.
For sure. For sure. Absolutely.
Yep.
So what would you say if you were talking to a new provider, what tips or tricks would you give them to be able to cope with what they're about to face in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years of their career?
I would probably say to give yourself some grace and to get into therapy before you think you need it. Yeah, do it before you think you need it, because by the time that you feel or know that you need it, you're way in the weeds. You're way in the weeds. And I think we're getting to understand as a culture better that therapy can be good, even if it's a very light session. Nobody has to have a deep session every time, but having a place to go to at least vent and, get some understanding of why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, because blocking off your emotions doesn't do good for your home life. It just doesn't.
Yeah,
It doesn't do
exactly.
good. We become very difficult to live with, and easily emotionally detached if we're not careful. If we're not careful, we can definitely become just emotionally detached because that's what we're used to dealing with. So,
Yeah, exactly.
well,
Exactly.
thank you all for joining us today. That's all. We wanted to just mention a couple things today that we, as providers deal with, as nurses deal with, doctors deal with them. We, everybody in the healthcare field deals with this. But we just want to just really just bring awareness to it, and that there is help out there. And even virtual help is great, even virtual help. So if you have any questions or comments, you can certainly reach out to us. You can find me at hamiltontelehealth.com, and Kelly, you can find her at charihealth.com,
Yep.
CHARI health.com. I looked at your website last night. It's beautiful.
Yay,
It's beautiful.
thanks.
So, all right, guys, see you next time.
Bye.